Inside ADX Florence, America's most secure Supermax prison, full documentary. Hit subscribe, like, and comment now before you forget, because what you're about to see inside America's most secure Supermax prison isn't on any tour, isn't in any official press release, and once you know it, you can't unknow it. Snow blew sideways across the high desert of southern Colorado, erasing the highway lines and cloaking the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in a pale mist. At the edge of the wideout rose a structure that looked less like a prison than a Cold War bunker. High concrete walls, gun towers, and a perimeter bristling with motion sensors and razor wire. Officially it was the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, ADX Florence. Unofficially it was the Alcatraz of the Rockies, home to the most dangerous men in federal custody. At 3:12 a.m. an unmarked convoy rolled off the interstate and down the access road. Inside the lead vehicle sat Special Agent Daniel Cross, a 20-year veteran of the FBI's Denver field office. He wasn't here for a tour. He was here because 3 days earlier, a high-value inmate had disappeared, on paper. The Bureau of Prisons insisted the prisoner was still in his cell. Cross had received a different message, a grainy photo of a man outside a gas station in Pueblo, the timestamp from 2 nights ago, with a single word typed beneath it, released. The inmate in the photo was Marcus Kane, a former bomb maker linked to an extremist network and serving multiple life sentences. He was supposed to be locked down 23 hours a day in a 7 by 12-foot cell. No contact visits, no window to the outside world. If the photo was real, it meant the impossible. Someone had smuggled Kane out of the most secure prison in America. Cross gripped the folder in his lap. Inside were years of intelligence reports, disciplinary logs, and a thin sheaf of handwritten letters smuggled out by a cooperative guard. The letters hinted at a secret channel inside ADX Florence, a code name whispered by inmates for a system of favors and threats that reached beyond the walls. The letters had ended abruptly last month. When the convoy reached the outer gate, a guard scanned their IDs without expression. Snow swirled under the floodlights. Beyond the Sally Port, the compound stretched like a chessboard of concrete blocks. Each unit was designed to isolate: thick walls, sound-dampening architecture, electronically controlled doors. Inmates were fed through slots, exercised alone in narrow pens known as dog runs, and rarely saw another human being. Yet the place pulsed with invisible lines of communication, codes tapped on pipes, messages hidden in legal mail, alliances formed between cells. Cross had studied it for years, but tonight felt different. Tonight the prison itself seemed to be holding its breath. Warden Helen Grant met him at the entrance to the control center, a glassed-in room overlooking rows of monitors. She was a tall woman with iron-gray hair pulled back in a knot and eyes that missed nothing. "We've run every count, every camera," she said without preamble. "Kane hasn't gone anywhere." Cross laid the photo on the desk between them. "Then explain this." Grant's jaw tightened. She reached for the photo then stopped. "Where did you get this?" "Anonymous," Cross said. "Like the letters." For a moment the only sound was the hum of the monitors. On one screen an inmate shuffled in his cell, head down, a book open on his knees. The timestamp read live. Marcus Kane, or someone who looked exactly like him, sat reading as if nothing were amiss. Grant's voice was even. "That's his cell right now. Camera feeds direct from the unit. He hasn't left." Cross studied the image. Something about it bothered him, the angle of the shadows, the way the book's cover was blank. "Could be looped," he murmured. Grant stiffened. "Agent Cross, this is the most secure facility in the federal system. There are no loops." "Then you won't mind if I see for myself." She hesitated, then nodded. "You'll have to go through full security. No weapons." Minutes later Cross and a single correctional officer named Ellis rode an elevator down to the special housing unit. The air grew colder, drier. Layers of concrete muffled every sound. Ellis swiped his badge at a series of doors until they stood in a corridor lined with steel doors and small narrow windows. "Kane's cell is at the end," Ellis said. As they walked, Cross noted the details. Faint marks on the floor where something heavy had been dragged, a scrap of paper stuck in a vent. The corridor felt abandoned, yet the sense of being watched was palpable. Inside one cell an inmate stood perfectly still, staring at the wall. In another, a radio played faintly, but radios weren't allowed here. At the last door Ellis inserted a key. The slot clanged open. "Kane," he called. "Stand up." Cross peered through the window. The man on the bunk raised his head. Same face as the photo, same tattoos. But his eyes were glassy, unfocused. Cross felt a chill. The inmate wasn't reading. He was holding a blank piece of cardboard, moving his eyes back and forth as if following invisible words. Ellis frowned. He's on meds, but he was fine at count. Cross whispered, "It's a stand-in." Ellis shot him a look. "What?" Cross reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flashlight. He flicked it on and shone it through the window. The inmate didn't blink. His pupils didn't contract. His lips moved soundlessly. It was as if he were rehearsing lines. Ellis muttered, "Jesus." Cross turned off the light. "We need to open the cell." "That's against protocol." "Open it." Ellis hesitated, then keyed the door. It swung inward on heavy hinges. The inmate didn't move. Cross stepped inside, the smell of antiseptic and sweat hitting him like a wall. Up close the differences were clear. The jaw slightly narrower, the tattoo ink fresher. Whoever this man was, he wasn't Marcus Kane. Cross leaned close. "Where is he?" The man's lips trembled. A whisper escaped, "Under." Then his eyes rolled back and he collapsed, convulsing. Foam bubbled at his mouth. Cross grabbed his shoulder, but it was too late. The man lay still, a faint chemical odor rising from his skin. Ellis stumbled back. "What the hell is going on?" Cross looked at the vent above the bunk. A thin draft blew from it, air from somewhere else. He stood on the bunk and pried at the grate. It came loose easily, revealing not ductwork but a dark shaft descending into the bowels of the prison. "Under?" Cross repeated softly. Behind them the door clanged shut. The electronic lock engaged with a heavy click. Cross spun. Ellis was on the other side of the glass, eyes wide. "I didn't do it," he shouted. It locked itself. The lights flickered. For a moment the corridor outside went black, then emergency red lights bathed the hallway in blood-colored glow. An alarm began to pulse softly, not the normal high-pitched siren but a low, rhythmic tone like a heartbeat. Cross crouched at the vent, the cold air flowing over his face. Somewhere below, faint and unmistakable, he heard a train horn. And then, cutting through the hum of the alarm, came a voice from a hidden speaker in the ceiling, calm, measured, and chillingly familiar. "Agent Cross. Welcome to Florence. Ready for your tour?" The voice on the hidden speaker was steady, almost polite. "Agent Cross. Welcome to Florence. Ready for your tour?" Cross's pulse hammered. The low alarm continued its pulse, red light washing over the cell like a heartbeat. He glanced at the collapsed man on the bunk, the stand-in, then back at the vent. Cold air gusted from below. The faint train horn moaned again. He called through the door. "Ellis, override the lock." The officer's face was pale behind the glass. "It's frozen. Central says all doors are locked. They're blaming a software glitch." Cross felt a chill that had nothing to do with the vent. This wasn't a glitch. It was choreography. Someone had known he would be here, knew the Bureau's routines, knew how to lock him in. "Get help," Cross snapped. "Tell Warden Grant." But Ellis had already vanished down the corridor. Cross turned back to the vent. He weighed his options. Stay locked in with a corpse and wait to be silenced, or crawl into the shaft leading into the guts of ADX Florence. He chose the shaft. He ripped the grate fully off, dropped his flashlight inside, then swung his legs in. The metal was icy. He lowered himself until his boots found rungs welded into the wall, like a ladder never meant to be seen. He started climbing down. The shaft descended for what felt like stories. The sound of the alarm faded, replaced by the low hum of turbines. His flashlight beam swept across steel pipes, cables, and faded maintenance markings. At last he emerged into a concrete chamber lit by dim work lamps. A narrow-gauge rail track cut through the center, running off into darkness. Wooden crates stacked high lined the walls. The smell was diesel and cold iron, but also something sweeter, the unmistakable tang of cleaning solvents used to scrub blood. He moved along the track, crouched low. He passed a side room where rows of monitors showed camera feeds from every unit. Most cells appeared normal, but some feeds were black. Others showed empty corridors, unguarded. Someone was editing reality in real time. On a table lay a laptop open to a spreadsheet. Names of inmates, codes, transfer dates. One column labeled channel. Another labeled out. His heart pounded. This was the secret system the letters had hinted at, the hidden channel under ADX. "Keep moving, Agent," a voice called from the shadows. Cross spun, gun drawn, but he was unarmed. He had surrendered his weapon at security. All he had was the flashlight. He swept the beam across the room. A man stood at the far end, hands in pockets. He wore a Bureau of Prisons jacket but no name tag. "You're making a mistake," the man said. "This isn't your world." "Where's Marcus Kane?" Cross demanded. The man smiled faintly. "You're standing where he stood." From behind the stranger, another door opened. 2 more figures stepped out, faces masked, carrying duffel bags. One tossed a bag onto a cart sitting on the rails. It clanked with the weight of metal. Weapons? Explosives? Cross realized the truth. ADX wasn't just holding dangerous men, it was a hub to move them, their money, their orders, and maybe even to smuggle them out. "Why me?" he asked. "Because you keep digging," the man replied. "You think you're exposing us. You're just mapping the system for us." Cross's mind raced. He needed evidence, a way out, and to stay alive. He took a small digital recorder from his pocket, a habit from years in the field, and flicked it on inside his jacket. The man stepped closer. "We can end this, Agent. Walk away. This isn't your fight." Cross thought of Kane's victims. Not an option. The man sighed. "Then you'll join him." He nodded to the masked figures. They lifted their rifles. Cross bolted into the nearest side tunnel. Bullets sparked off the concrete. He ran blindly, the tunnel narrowing, air growing hotter. The train horn moaned again, louder. Ahead, the passage opened into a cavernous maintenance hall where a small electric cart sat idling on the tracks. He jumped in and slammed the accelerator. The cart lurched forward, wheels squealing on the rails. Behind him, shouts echoed, then the whine of engines, his pursuers on another cart. He sped through a series of low arches. The walls were raw concrete, dripping with moisture. Every 100 feet a maintenance lamp flickered, casting brief glimpses of other side tunnels leading who knew where. The horn moaned again, this time echoing directly above him. Maybe the prison's real yard, maybe something else. His cart shot out into a larger tunnel lined with chain-link fences. Behind one fence stood cages of confiscated contraband, radios, books, sharpened metal. Behind another fence were stacks of body armor and riot shields. ADX Florence's hidden stockpile. He took a sharp curve, nearly flipping. Sparks sprayed from the wheels. Ahead, the tunnel split. A sign bolted to the wall, old and rusted, "Red Service Shaft C, Hatch." He veered left. The passage climbed upward. The air grew colder. He could hear the roar of engines behind him closing in. He jammed the throttle harder. At last a steel hatch loomed above a short flight of steps. He braked, leapt from the cart, and scrambled up. The hatch was bolted from the other side. He threw his shoulder into it. It didn't budge. Boots pounded the rail behind him. He turned. The masked men were closing fast, rifles up. He ducked into a side alcove just as gunfire ripped the air. Plaster exploded. He pressed himself flat, breathing hard. His fingers brushed something cold and metal, an old maintenance panel. He yanked it open. Inside were wires and a manual lever. He pulled the lever. A siren wailed somewhere above. The hatch above him clicked. He shoved it open and crawled into a freezing blast of air. He emerged inside what looked like a forgotten service room beneath the prison's administration building. Rusted lockers lined the walls. Above, a grated floor showed silhouettes moving. Guards? Inmates? He couldn't tell. He closed the hatch and crouched, listening. The masked men hadn't followed. Maybe they'd taken another route. Maybe they were waiting. He took out his recorder and whispered everything he'd seen, the rail tunnels, the spreadsheets, the duffel bags. He tucked it into his boot. Then he heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, descending the stairs into the service room. Warden Grant stepped into view. Her expression was unreadable. "You weren't supposed to see this," she said quietly. Cross straightened. "You're running it." "I'm managing it," she said. "For the country. For control. You think we can lock up men like Kane forever without cost? We built a channel to move the most dangerous pieces off the board. You weren't supposed to get this close." She took a step closer. "Give me the recorder." Cross didn't move. "Where is Kane?" Grant's eyes hardened. "He's already gone." Behind her, the door swung shut and locked with a heavy clang. Cross realized he was no longer in a hidden corner of ADX Florence. He was in its heart, and the warden herself was part of the network. She raised a hand. 2 guards stepped out of the shadows, weapons lowered but ready. "You can walk out of here, Agent," she said. "No charges, no scandal. Or you can stay and never see daylight again. Choose." Cross looked from her to the guards, then to the hatch he'd climbed through. His only evidence was the recorder in his boot. His only hope was finding Kane. He took a slow breath. "I'm not done yet." Grant's lips curved in a small, cold smile. "Neither are we." She turned to the guards. "Take him to sublevel 4. He wants to see under? We'll show him under." The guards moved forward. Cross tensed, ready to fight, But then he saw what was behind them through the open doorway. A dim corridor descending deeper into the prison, lined with cells that didn't exist on any blueprint. From somewhere below, the train horn blew again, long and low. Grant's voice was almost a whisper. "Welcome to the real Florence." The guard's hands closed on Agent Cross's arms like iron. He didn't resist as they guided him down the dim corridor behind Warden Grant. The floor sloped steadily downward, the air growing colder and wetter, the faint smell of diesel rising with every step. From somewhere deep below, the train horn moaned, longer this time, as if announcing a departure. They reached a steel door marked Sublevel 4, Restricted. Grant swiped a badge and the door opened into a cavernous chamber. It looked nothing like a prison. Tracks ran down the center toward a mouth of darkness. Crates, duffel bags, and shipping containers lined the walls. Portable floodlights cast hard shadows across faces of men cross-recognized from sealed case files. Inmates who were supposed to be in solitary were here, walking freely, working the platforms, loading cargo. "This is impossible," Cross muttered. "No," Grant said softly. "It's inevitable. The official system can't hold men like this forever. This is the pressure valve." Cross stared at her. "You're running a black site under ADX. Smuggling out the worst prisoners." "We're relocating," she said. "Moving pieces where they do less harm. Sometimes, doing what the courts can't." "Marcus Kane?" he asked. Grant's expression didn't change. "Gone. Like the others. He has his uses elsewhere." Cross's stomach turned. "You've turned the most secure Supermax in America into a cartel's airport." Grant's eyes hardened. "Watch your words. This isn't a cartel. It's a network. We control it." "No," Cross said. "It controls you." Grant nodded to the guards. "Put him on the next train. We can't let him leave." The guards pushed Cross toward a waiting cart, an enclosed car on the narrow-gauge track. Inside were shackles bolted to the floor. He struggled once, then stopped, forcing himself to think. In his boot, the small digital recorder still held everything he'd whispered, but it wouldn't matter if he disappeared with it. He glanced at the crates stacked nearest the track. Some bore hazard symbols. Others were marked with shipping codes from ports around the world. On top of one sat a maintenance toolkit. An idea formed. "Fine," he said. "I'll go quietly." The guards shoved him into the car. One bent to lock the shackles. Cross lunged sideways, snatched the toolkit, and hurled it at the nearest floodlight. Glass exploded. Darkness swallowed the chamber. He rolled out of the car, ducked under the platform, and sprinted toward the far end where a service ladder climbed to a catwalk above. Shouts erupted. Muzzle flashes lit the dark. He climbed, boots slipping on the rungs. At the top he crawled along the catwalk, heart hammering. Below, the cart he'd been in began to move, pushed by invisible hands into the tunnel. The horn blared, echoing like a beast in the dark. He reached a small control booth overlooking the chamber. Inside was a console of switches and monitors. One monitor showed the tunnel beyond, an underground rail stretching for miles. Another showed the main prison above, its cells empty, its cameras looping false feeds. He hit a switch labeled emergency ventilation. Alarm screamed. Huge fans roared to life, whipping dust into a blinding storm. People below shouted, their voices lost in the noise. Grant's voice crackled from an intercom. "Cross, you're destroying everything." "No," he shouted back. "I'm showing it." He yanked open a panel and found a fiber optic line feeding the monitors. He pulled a cable from his pocket, a secure uplink device he always carried for field work, and jammed it into the port. His phone vibrated as the connection opened. Data began to upload. The video feeds, the spreadsheets, the audio he'd recorded. For a brief moment he saw a progress bar climb across the screen. Then a warning flashed, signal interference detected. Someone was jamming him. He gritted his teeth and held the phone high, searching for a sliver of signal. Above, a ventilation shaft opened to the Colorado sky. He climbed onto the console, shoved open the grate and pushed the phone up into the icy air. The progress bar crept higher. Below, Grant appeared on the platform, hair whipping in the artificial wind. She raised a megaphone. "Agent Cross, you don't understand what you're unleashing." He shouted down, "You built a secret exit for monsters. Now the world will see it." The bar hit 100%. His phone buzzed, upload complete. He dropped it back into his pocket. Grant's face twisted. "Do you think the truth will save you?" Cross hesitated. "No. But it will outlive me." A sharp crack split the air. One of the guards had fired. A bullet ricocheted off the catwalk inches from his foot. He dropped into the ventilation shaft, sliding through darkness as shots echoed above. The shaft angled upward, then sideways, then up again. He tumbled out onto a snow-covered slope behind the prison. He staggered to his feet. Dawn was breaking over the Rockies, the prison a hulking silhouette against the light. Sirens wailed from inside. Helicopters circled, their rotors scattering snow like ash. He ran down the slope toward a stand of scrub trees. His chest burned, his muscles screamed, but he didn't stop. In his pocket, the phone held the upload confirmation. Somewhere in the cloud, the files were safe. Behind him, the prison's outer wall shuddered as a concealed hatch opened and a small train car emerged, disappearing into a hidden tunnel beneath the desert. Even as the raid alarms sounded, the network was moving its cargo to safety. He had exposed it, but it was still running. He reached the cover of the trees and collapsed, gasping. Snowflakes melted on his skin. For a moment there was only silence. Then his phone buzzed. A message popped up from an unknown number. "Nice try, Agent Cross. See you soon." He stared at it. The sender ID was masked, but the signature at the bottom made his blood run cold. MK. Marcus Kane. Cross closed his eyes. Kane wasn't just gone, he was watching. In the distance, ADX Florence's floodlights flickered, then steadied. The fortress still stood. The network still pulsed beneath it. But the world now knew. Cross had fired the first shot in a war fought in shadows. He whispered to himself, "If you think this was intense, you're not ready for what comes next." He opened his eyes, the sunrise burning red over the mountains. Somewhere deep inside the prison, the horn blew one last time, a low, mournful note carrying across the frozen plain. And then silence.